or if not, summarize them and bring them to the board, hopefully through meetings as part of the agenda, or also by email to get a quick answer and things like that. So it's just a form of communication. So I try to have them a few times a year. I think this is the 4th one now that we've had. So look, follow my Facebook page is really where I've been posting them. And I just encourage y'all to continue coming for updates and as a chance to get community feedback on the different programs and actions of the school district. So real quick, I'll start with giving some financial reports. This is similar to a few people, for those who have been here or watched the last one. It's similar, but with updated numbers since we've approved the 2026 bond. Talking about budgets, we're about to get into another budget cycle where we set the budget and soon after that, the millage rate. So, and we also really just started looking at the preliminary numbers of our audit that came in from last year. So there's some discussion we had about that. Transfers from the general fund to the building program, a little bit about bonds, a little bit about the new bonds that was just approved and sold, and then other considerations. Trying to get all this done in about 15 to 20 minutes so we can spend the bulk of the time getting feedback and talking about your concerns. And this is a lot to read. Essentially, I just have to let people know I'm here as an individual board member. I don't have the authority to speak on behalf of the school district or on behalf of the board as a whole. So the opinions that I might share with you and the knowledge that I share, please keep in mind that's coming from me as an individual board member and sharing it with you. Certain things I really can't talk about legally, student-specific concerns, legal issues, pending cases, things like that. So I just try to put it out front of why I'm here, the limitations of what I can do, but I can certainly listen to any of your concerns and document them and bring them to the board. So please understand my limitations. Does not mean that you're not free to share anything you would like to share. All right, I won't go too into this. I will be sharing these slides on Facebook, but I do try to give instructions to people for how to find the audit report, and we'll go over some of the key aspects of it, because I think one of the most powerful things we can do as citizens is understand our financial reports and understand some of the key pieces of information to know what our budget looks like at the beginning of the budget cycle and what it looks like at the end of the budget cycle with amendments, and really have an understanding of how your tax money is being spent. And from there, you can start participating in, such as the budget hearings, have a public participation section where you can then go talk about and say, hey, last year we did this as a citizen. I think this would be a better use of our money, or however you want to approach it. But it starts with the knowledge. So this is a step-by-step instruction of how to find those. Now in your packets, I'll kind of use these packets a little bit. Did everybody get one at the sign-in? If not, I would go ahead and grab one because I'll kind of walk y'all through those. So in your packets, you'll have what's called a Schedule 1. Now this is a lot for a screen, obviously, but if you look at, that's why I try to give everybody a copy. So this is your budget tracker, and you'll see that this is the general fund in that red box. So why that's important is your general fund is your operations. That is what you're going to pay your teachers with. That is what you're going to do school supplies and programs. Anything that is related to your annual operations is going to come out of your general fund. So it's, again, very important to know that it's not the capital fund. So we'll talk about the capital fund separately, and that will look different, but your capital fund is what your eSPLOST dollars do. That's where your building program is. And so it's important to understand that when you're setting a budget, you're setting a budget for your operating, what does our school need year to year? And that is different from your eSPLOST budget, which is going to be your building program funds and building the schools. So your general fund, the revenue for that is primarily your property tax, some of the state money that we get for students, and a little bit of federal dollars. And your capital fund is primarily your eSPLOST dollars. So this is where you would look at your general fund. This is from 2024, because like I said, the 2025 audit is not finalized yet, so it hasn't been shared yet. So you'll see the general fund. This is kind of a zoom in here. You've got your categories up top. So your original budget is the budget at the beginning of the fiscal year. That second column is going to be your final budget. That means that after amendments happened throughout the year, that is how your fiscal year budget ended and how it looked. Your actual amounts are the actual amounts reported by the district for the fiscal year for the purpose of this report. So those are the actual amounts either brought in through revenue or spent per category. And then the variance, it calculates, okay, what was the difference between your actual amounts and your final budget? So keep in mind just these different categories when you're looking at that Schedule 1 to understand here's where we started, here's where we ended our budget with all the, because they do a lot of amendments throughout the year. Here's what amount we actually received or spent, and here's how different it was, the variance between what we, between our budget and the actuals. Fund balances, this is the bottom of that Schedule 1 sheet. And you'll see this is almost kind of like if you would think of what's left over in your checking account that you can spend, and you're going to want to keep a certain amount in there from year to year. But you can track that if it went up or down each year. And this is a very quick overview, but again, it's just to get you familiar with some of the most important documents I think as a citizen you're going to want to pay attention to. So you don't have this one. You have this in your packets. We'll start with this one. So this is your 2022 eSPLOST program. This is also in your financial report. It's called Schedule 9, and you should have a copy of this one. And you're going to see here, it breaks it into different categories of what that eSPLOST was going to accomplish. Now, the column estimated cost, and it gives a definition by this report that says it's the original cost estimate as specified in the resolution calling for the imposition of the education or eSPLOST tax. So essentially when they went to do the eSPLOST tax, that is the budget they had in mind for what they intended to do. So for the 2022 was $160 million. That second column, the current estimated cost, that is the budget of what they're using for when they're hiring contractors to actually build the schools. And so the definition for that is the current estimated total cost of the projects, includes all costs from project inception to completion. And so you'll see that those are very different. We're going to talk about that a little bit later as to why, but it's important to understand the original budget is what was brought into SPLOST saying, hey, we need this amount of money to do these amount of projects. The second column, that current estimated cost, is when they actually go to do the projects and create the budget for each project. That's the amount that they believe each project is going to cost, and that's the amount that they hire a contractor for. But again, we'll talk about why those are so different. All right, here's something else in the financial reports. I don't believe you have a copy of this one, but again, if you access the slides, once I post them, you'll be able to find this in your financial report. It's called Exhibit J, Bond Information. So this is a really great section of your annual audit because it summarizes for you what your bond debt is by each series. So your 2020 series, it says that the amount issued was 52, or a total between them of 160 million, and the amount that you still owe is that 146 million amount, 195,000. So that's just kind of a good summary of saying how much left of that bond that you have to pay off still. All right, now this is really where it gets good because that amount sometimes is not the full picture. This is where, if you want to understand truly how much you're going to pay, because some of these charts, and this is where it gets tricky reading financial reports, why I wanted to highlight a few things, is because some of the reports will say your bond debt and it will only say the principal that you have left to pay off. This one will show the principal and interest, which is the actual money that is going to come out of the capital fund and go to the debt fund to pay this off. So if you're only looking at what's left of the principal of the bond, you're missing a good chunk of the picture. And so this chart is also part of that schedule in the same section of your financial report. And this will give you each year. So in fiscal year 2025, the principal and the interest is the amount that you're going to need to budget for fiscal year 25, that amount needs to be paid. For fiscal year 26, that principal and interest, that will be the amount that you're needing to budget from your capital funds to make sure that that's paid. Those are kind of, if you have a car, you're going to consider that like your total car payment. Some of it goes to principal, some of it goes to interest, right? But either way, you know that that payment is due every month. In this case, it's due every year, or sometimes they'll break it into twice a year. But it gives a total of, from this point on, we owe this much principal, this much interest, and the payments stretch from 2025 to 2036. Now, keep in mind, this was from 2024, and that's why we're going to talk about the new series of bonds, the 2026 bonds that we just sold separately, because they're not factored into this. Debt service, so this is your transfers. It's called Note 7. It's in the same kind of general section of your financial report. This will document all of your transfers. So it's pretty typical to see transfers from your capital projects fund into your debt service fund, because your capital projects, like we talked about, that's your eSPLOST dollars. They're going to transfer it over into a separate bank account, your debt fund, and that's where those payments are going to be drawn from to pay your annual bond principal and interest. So this is typical. You're always going to see that capital projects transferring that amount to the debt service to pay off that amount every year. However, in this case, this was 2022's report. We have a pattern in our school district of transferring money out of the general fund and putting that into the capital projects and the debt service fund. Sometimes it all goes into capital projects, sometimes it gets split. So in 2022, what we saw was, out of your operating costs, your general fund, $8.8 million got put in the capital projects, $17.3 million got put into the debt service fund, and essentially that money was used to pay off the bond and interest payments from the general fund, which is your general school operations, and then with some left over, put it into the capital projects fund to kind of bump up those eSPLOST dollars for the building program. So those transfers on each financial report are going to show you how much money was transferred out of the general fund and where it went and what it was used for. All right, so we're going to switch gears from the audit report into the budget. So the audit is the required document every year that goes through and says, hey, do your banking statements, your financial statements, do what the state requires it to do. Is it accurate? Is it transparent? Is it clear? Is it following the accounting guidelines? So what it does not do is say, are you making good decisions with your money? Are you making bad decisions with your money? Are you financially sound? Are you not? Our audits just say, and this was something that came out at the meeting on Tuesday, where it was very clear, the purpose of the audits is truly to say, are we following the law with how we do our financials? And of course, the answer has always been yes, and it should always be yes. So we would expect nothing less. Alex Casado is our CFO, and he does a really, really good job. And so when you hear that we have great audits and we're clean on our audits, understand that from my perspective, I would expect no less, because we have a great CFO. He's doing great things. We're being accurate in the way we report things. But sometimes that's kind of verbally tweaked a little bit to say, hey, because we have great audits, we must be making great financial decisions. Those two things are not equivalent. So just kind of keep in mind that the purpose of the audit is truly to say, are we following the law with how we do our accounting, or are we not? And of course, the answer always should be yes, and always has been yes. But here's where you can access the budget. So the budget, like I said, we're about to go into another budgeting cycle in April. And we're going to start having the hearings where you're going to see the presentations of, hey, here's what we want our budget. Here's what we think our tax dollars are going to be. Here's what we think we're going to get from the state. Here's what we think we're going to get from property taxes based on the patterns of the digest. Here's what we think for federal. So here's what we think we're going to get, and here's what the district departments have stated that they need to spend. And so then the board talks, and we make priorities based on community input, and teacher raises start getting talked about, and we start making the numbers match and creating the budget, right? So here's an example of the most recent fiscal year 2025 budget. Well, not most recent, one year back, I guess. And so you'll see it. This is the final adopted budget that the board walked away from the budget hearings with at the beginning of the budget cycle. And you'll see that your general fund, I won't even mess with nutrition. That's kind of an in and out type of fund. Your building fund is your capital, that debt service. So you can kind of see those transfers that we talked about. There was nothing listed on transfers at that point in time, and the building fund expected to transfer that bond and debt amount into the debt service fund to pay off the bond interest and premiums. All right, so here's at the end of the year what the budget looked like. So we'll do a side-by-side comparison in a minute, but by the end of the fiscal year, you'll see that the budget had changed somewhat significantly for the general fund, because now on the other outlays, you see that $23 million that got transferred. So before it wasn't budgeted, by the end of the budget of the fiscal year, it shows up as another added item that got transferred out of the general fund into the capital fund. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this too. All right, so don't be overwhelmed. I'm going to go slow here. So this is a side-by-side of that beginning budget that I showed you, that 349 matches 349 to the end budget, where now the end budget shows expected revenue of $362 million, but an actual revenue of $375 million. The final budget showed the total expenditures at $374 million, would start out at $349, and then the actual expenditures came in at $365 million. So you see a lot of changes. You see what we started the year with, what the end of the budget was, and then what the actual amounts of revenue and expenditures were. And so the total revenue finally collected was $375 million. The total expenditures were $341 million plus 23.9, about $24 million of transfers, to total $365 million, right? So in summary, the revenue increased $26 million, the expenses decreased $8 million, and the extra becomes the other outlays that's transferred to the fund balance. Because one of the questions that I've had is, how is it that our budget matches at the beginning of the year from revenues and expenditures, but yet then when you go to the financial reports, you see $23 million, $26 million, $10 million being transferred every year into the capital funds. And so part of the reason why I'm finding that that happens is because we end up collecting a lot more revenue than we expected at the beginning of the budget cycle. And then our expenditures, even if they change or increase, there's still quite a gap between those. And so I think that's just a good pattern to keep an eye on as we go into this next budget cycle. Because why that's important is, for example, our last budget cycle, there was a desire to hire more SPED paraprofessionals. Because we did not have that $10 million accounted for, it was determined that there was not money to hire SPED paraprofessionals because there was no money in the budget. And so at the end of the year, if you find that you have an extra $10, $20 million that you're transferring into your building program funds, that's money that theoretically could be budgeted to hire your SPED paraprofessionals, to give your teachers a higher cost of living adjustment, things like that, because that's part of those annual operating expenses versus the building program capital fund eSPLOST dollars. All right, so this was from, this is the most recent one, 26.2 million, or this is 2022, sorry. 2023 was a 10 million transfer, 2025 came in at 23.9 million. And for each time that I've kind of dug into this, it seems to be the same pattern of the revenues are budgeted low and then come in high. The expenditures maybe change a little bit, but the difference between the revenues and expenditures ends up creating this kind of excess of money in the millions of dollars that then gets transferred to the building program. So one of the discussions I do want to have as soon as I wrap this up here in the next few minutes is, as citizens, if there's extra money that comes in as revenue, where would you like to see that spent? And get an idea of what your priorities are for that. Again, more financials. I won't go into this. I did give you a copy of this. This is the payment schedule for the 2026 bonds. The principal that we received was $180 million. The interest that it will cost is $112 million over the course of about 20 years. So that's $292 million that will end up having to be repaid for that. You have a copy of this as well. This is just kind of putting it into perspective so that you can see for the next 4 SPLOST cycles, how much money of that SPLOST will be allocated for repaying your your bonds. So 76 million approximately from the previous bonds, those 20 and 23 that we looked at. Now we've added another $64 million in payments for this 2026 bond. So you add those together. From the 27 to 2032 eSPLOST that's been approved, that much of it Prop 114, 115 million is going to go to repay the bonds. You go into your next eSPLOST, you're getting 85 million plus 34 million. You go to the one after, you've got 108.6 million. So now the way it stands for the next 4 eSPLOST cycles, you can keep track, and I'm going to be keeping track and sharing periodically at these town halls where we're at as far as if we add more bonds to that over any of this time period, that's going to add to those payments that we currently have based on this 2026 bond schedule. And this is a comparison chart for the different SPLOSTs series bonds. We have the 2011 series bonds. The principal is 35 million, interest was 6.5. That's the total of what it costs to repay, and then how many terms. So there's a pattern where we used to kind of pay these bonds off by the end of the SPLOST cycle, give or take, and then kind of go into the next SPLOST, getting new bonds to start projects right away, and then paying that back over the next SPLOST cycle. And now we've kind of changed that pattern. As of 2023 series, now it's taking 13 years to pay back. And then with this new one, now we're into 20 years to pay back. And so as we extend these payments into multiple future SPLOST cycles, the amount of interest does increase. All right, so other considerations. This 2026 bonds that we sold are going to cover Harlem High School and Greenbrier High School. More are going to expect it to be sold to cover the rest of the projects for the SPLOST. So those charts I just showed you, if we end up selling more bonds, those are going to be added to those charts depending on what that payment schedule is going to look like. But there's already anticipation of those in the works to get those other projects done. Other considerations, schools are aging. I think around 40 years is when they look at doing major renovations and major work. So even as we're going into these, 20 years of SPLOSTs and 4 SPLOST cycles, every time we need to work on a new school as they continue to age over time, we're looking at needing more revenues. And so the more bonds and repayments that we push into the future, the less eSPLOST money we have to build at the current time and build those schools. So I think we always need to keep in mind that even as we're focusing on the schools now, it's a cycle and there's always ones coming up that are needing to have work in the future. All right, so that's covers the financials. Like I said, I wanted to go over that a little bit with you, primarily to give you a background to ask the very important question now of if we have extra money, because just like I said, we just got our first look at the financial audit for this past year. It hasn't been formalized yet and put out, but from the numbers that we looked at, I'm seeing the pattern again of the revenues came in at a lot higher than it was expected. The expenditures came in and there was a pretty big gap between them. Now, we have not done a transfer over to the building program. I know it was talked about at one point. It has not been done. And there's some differing opinions of should it go to the capital fund? Should it be used for other things? So the $1 million question right now is, if there's extra money in your general fund, where would you like to see it used? Like I said, some of the things we talked about were more paraprofessionals, SPED paraprofessionals in particular. Some of the other things, I know teachers, their recommended increase had to be cut back last year because they didn't think there was going to be enough revenue coming in. So if we had more revenue, we could give the teachers the full recommended increase if that's something that's a priority. I know some of the, I think hiring a math instructor was one of the priorities. I don't remember if that one made it into the list, because the way they do it, there's a list of, hey, we really need this, and then they do a cutoff and say, and if we have extra, we really would like these too. And so if we have more money that we're expecting, more revenue that we account for, then we can now do some more items on that list, if you can imagine that. And so, I mean, does anybody have an opinion? I mean, from a public perspective, I know there is value to transferring it to the building program at times, because you're paying, ideally, you pay off maybe more of that bond amount. Now, so far, we haven't paid additional on the bonds. It's been used towards the contracts themselves for building the schools. But that is, something to where that extra money could be used to pay the bond principal early. if that's something that's a priority. But that's where I want the question out there, because we are going into another budgeting cycle. And this is now the citizens' opportunity to come to these budget meetings, to email your board members, to, bring your opinions tonight. Where would you like to see your taxpayer money spent? So like a budget that more closely reflects the actual numbers we're seeing? Okay.
We don't have a way statement. Like it comes, that's why it's on the back end.
So that's a great question, because you'll never know that. But I can say that there are trends. So from 2021 through 2024, so each of those 4 years, and I saw it again this year on the audit, our state money comes in approximately $10 million higher than expected. So for 2021, we budgeted 145 million, we got 155 million. 22 was 161 to 176, so it came in at 15 million higher. 2023 was 170 budgeted, 180 actual. 2024 was 188 budgeted, 198 actual. And it happened again this year. I don't have this year's numbers added in because the audit's not finalized. So you are absolutely right. But I can look, and I'm sure Alex, our financial guy, does this as well. I can look and say, hey, there's categories where over the last 4 years, this was part of our discussions last year when we did the budgeting cycle, was, hey, we'll never know, like you said. And I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, well, for the last 4 years, 5 years really, we've had an extra 10 million come from the state. Let's go budget 10 more million. I wouldn't be comfortable with that, because you never know what could happen. But I would be comfortable saying, hey, let's budget an extra 3 million. I think our conversations last year for the paras and the teachers and some of those items came in at about the $2 to $3 million mark, to where I'm comfortable based on these trends to say, hey, I think that spending an extra 3 million to get some sped paraprofessionals, I'm comfortable making that jump. And then let's see how next year goes. Do we still have extra? Do we have less extra? We have quite a good fund balance, and there are reserves. I think it was 55 million was that sheet. I'd have to look to give you a current number, but we do have a nice fund balance in our reserves, to where if we had an anomaly type year or that trend didn't pan out, we do have a cushion to kind of work through it. And that's in addition to the fact that property tax funds have also come in somewhere between, $2 to $5 million extra every year, based on a very strong property tax digest. So I would agree absolutely that we will never know, and because of that, I would not be very ambitious to go the full end of what we could do just based on numbers, because every year is different. But I do think there's some room when we're talking about even just doing a few more things on the list, or if we look and we continue to have extra to transfer to the building program, maybe that would be something to say, okay, well, let's start planning on a certain amount of that. If it's extra, will go towards this maybe one-time expense or something along those lines. So I think there's a lot of value in trend analysis, so long as you don't go to the other extreme and get too confident with your numbers, because as we all know, it's crazy out there sometimes. That's a great question, though. Any other comments in general about financials, or are we ready to move on? I know I blasted a lot of numbers at you, but I promise I'll put the slides up to help you kind of work through it. It's not as intimidating as it seems. It really is. There's a lot in those financial reports, and if you want some good reading, on a Saturday night, go ahead and go for it. There's great info, but I tried to grab the things that I've found to be most helpful, that I reference constantly during board meetings, during financial discussions, answering questions, just because they're very clean before and after type charts. I guess one more point that I didn't really cover with why those SPLOST amounts are so much more, right? So just going back to that real quick, and then I'll open up the floor to just all other topics. Oh, I think I went back too far, I'm sorry. Oh, where is it? Okay, so this one you should have a copy in here. So why is that so much more? So let me kind of make it into an analogy. So if you were to take a loan payment out for a car for, say, $25,000, you would anticipate that your total repayment amount would be more than $25,000, right? And so you would pay it off over 5 years, and you would get the amount of your loan up front. Now, if you borrowed $25,000 for a car, you would probably buy a car somewhere in the vicinity of $25,000, right? But what if you were to borrow the $25,000 for a car and say, hey, I make $5,000 extra a year for the next 5 years. I make that $25,000 that I could pay that loan off with. But really, if I extend that loan into 10 years, then I can borrow more. I can have all that money up front, and I can still have plenty of my own income left over if I want to buy a $40,000 car. Are you guys following me here? I know it's probably easier to visualize. So what you do if you want to have $40,000 for your car, but you can only pay off $25,000 a year, what you would do is you would borrow a larger amount, longer term, make sure that you could make those payments for those first 5 years, and then now all of a sudden your budget for your car far exceeds what you actually make in those 5 years, because now you're borrowing more, you're collecting it now, and you're paying it off long term. And so that's kind of what's going on. So let me go to the 2026 picture and kind of show you what I mean. All right, so when we took this bond out, even though we're going to have to pay all of that out, we're still going to get a very large amount of money up front and only have to pay certain amounts of it over time. So do you have the sheet in your packet that looks like this? Let me double check. Let me grab a packet so I know what y'all have. Okay, so this sheet might not be in there. I'm sorry. But if I could explain it to you. So here's, I know you can't see it, but I just want to give you the idea of it. So under your revenues, this is a SPLOST budget chart right here that we get. So under your revenues, you have for your SPLOST cycle, you have the total amount of tax proceeds that you're going to get for your SPLOST cycle. So for the upcoming SPLOST, they're budgeting $235 million of eSPLOST revenues that they're going to get from your 1 cent tax, right? They also consider the bond proceeds as revenue. So when you get your bond proceed, that's considered revenue for your building program. So you are not only counting your actual income over the SPLOST cycle as revenue, but now you're counting those bonds that you paid up front as revenue. But under your expenditures, you're not counting 20 years worth of expenditures, you're only counting 5 years worth of expenditures. So even though you're getting the full amount of your bonds up front and you're spending that in addition to what you're spending, the only amount you're taking away from that is the 5 years worth of payments due during that SPLOST cycle. So what that means is you get a lot of money at the front end of your SPLOST. You get your revenues coming in, you get your full amount of your bonds coming in, and you only subtract the 5 years worth of payments that are coming up due on your bond and interest. So that it doesn't quite double, but that's where you're getting that $313 million, even as your SPLOST income is only estimated to be $160 million. So does that help explain why it's so high? So essentially you have that much cash between your SPLOST revenues over 5 years and your bonds getting paid to you right away. You have that much cash to go build your schools with for the next 5 years. However, you originally, if it all depends how you do your budget. Are you doing your budget based on the revenues coming in only? Or are you doing it based on the revenues coming in plus the fact that you got your bonds, your loan payment as cash too? And so when you count both as cash and you only take away a small portion of it, those 5 years of payments instead of the 20 years of payments, you're left with a lot of extra cash to build your schools with. And when that becomes your budget and you spend all of it by hiring contractors and signing contracts and spending that, then it plays into the fact that you still have the rest of those bonds to pay off like we talked about. And that's going to take a lot more time, a lot more revenue over the course of those 20 years. So when you see these, that explains why it's $160 million is your original budget, but the true amount that is being spent by the district is $313 million for those projects. And that's important to talk about because if you do that, there's expenditures down the road that have to be accounted for. And that's just something I like to bring to citizens' attention to start thinking about, because this is a new thing. When you go back and look at the older financial reports for the kind of the more previous SPLOST cycles, it used to kind of match up. So we've kind of started doing things differently as of, so you'll see this was the 2017 eSPLOST program. Notice it's a little bit closer. It was $140 million. And then they spent $192 million on the projects. So it's still different, but it's a lot closer. If you go back another one, they're about the same. So we used to only spend kind of what we received in the bonds and pay them back in 6 and 7 years, kind of like we saw with the chart. But then when we kind of started jumping to longer payment schedules, our cash budget started going up. So we were starting to spend more money. But then those payments now are brought into the future and then the interest amount goes up. So there's a cost associated with that. Okay, any questions about that? Let me find it. This one right here? Yeah. According to this chart, now this is from the memo that the board signed in November once they officially sold the bonds. So these are the final official amounts for the 2026 bonds. And so it was designed this way. I can't tell you why it was designed this way, but yes, if there's nothing there, then I would conclude from this, based on my knowledge, that that means there's no principal payments being made. So you can kind of see a pattern. Now those are bracketed because it's kind of separating what's going to be paid in the 27 to 2032 SPLOST cycle. And those payments above that are going to be paid prior because they're due prior. But this, so you can kind of see a bit of a trend, like you pointed out. So for the 2026 bonds, if you look at this, which should be in your packet, you'll see that there is a big difference in how the bonds are structured to be repaid. So you have $65.8 million in this upcoming SPLOST. Then it falls down to 34 million, 34.2 million. But then it jumps to 108 million. So that means when we get to 2037's East Floss, and again, this is assuming that no other bonds are sold between now and then, which we already know there's plans to do at least one more to finish up the rest of the schools. But kind of like we talked about, schools are constantly aging. So this is if there's no others, you are already looking at $108.6 million in your required bond and interest payments. So that's a very large number. So you have to kind of be thinking about what's your East Floss going to be looking like during that time period of, say, only 50% of it is being used to pay off bonds, and the other part has to be used for projects. Okay, so you're looking at least $216 splossed, assuming no other bonds are sold between now and then. And so those are kind of the things that we're looking at as our sploss start getting larger and larger. I don't know if you've noticed over time, they're starting to really, really increase from 60 to, I think, 170, and then now 270, or 160 and then 270. So they're expanding. How much? One, because we have a very strong tax base and the money's there. So they're confident that they'll receive it. But also because as these payments start accumulating over time, you're going to have much larger sploss. And then we start looking at, okay, so what if our tax digest doesn't continue growing? What if it shrinks? What if we run into a COVID type event that just sends everything haywire? Those are all things to, I think, consider as we're making these decisions to put payments further and further into the future. All right, any other financial questions, or do we want to move on to other categories? Or I'll just say open floor, whatever y'all want to talk about. I'll do my best to answer. I'll take notes to put in an email to the board. So what about, I've seen a lot on social media about special education. Does anybody have thoughts on ways on that program, ways to improve it, things that are going well about it? Teachers, anybody, bus drivers? I know the traffic on in front of Harlem High School has been a conversation we've been having. I mean, from my perspective, I see accidents there quite frequently, and they're not, a lot of times they're minor with new drivers and things like that. But I know we've talked about putting a police officer on the road to direct traffic, kind of like with Harlem Middle School. Are y'all seeing any issues in particular with Harlem High School and traffic on that road? Okay. Right.
Even when I was a student.
Okay.
A long time ago.
It's like 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think there's only been 2 accidents since construction started.
Okay.
I don't know that construction is.
And I don't think it's increased the accidents. Not that I've seen. I see about the same number, and luckily kind of small fender bender type stuff. But again, I would prefer there to be no accidents. But yeah, so that's something that's being talked about. And we had a really good meeting on Tuesday. Hopefully the video of that will come up soon, and I'll try to post it. I know a lot of us, it's hard to go to 3-hour meetings during supper time on a Tuesday. So any other questions or comments? Well, I mean, if y'all don't have anything else, thank you for your time going through slides. I'll hang out here. I've got till 7:30 before the library kicks me out. So I'll just hang out, and y'all feel free to either head home and get something to eat or ask me any questions you have. But thank you so much for taking the time to come out. I appreciate it. All right, thank y'all.